Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Howie Heckman. I'm one of the developers here at PTS. Today I'll be walking you through a pretty powerful feature within TracerPlus, the ability to write custom SQL commands in your TracerPlus sessions. So many of you may already be familiar with TracerPlus, but maybe you've used kind of some of the basic functionality of the application. Today with custom SQL, I'll show you how to kind of build on top of that, running custom queries, doing inserts and updates to your database table, as well as running some more advanced functions to kind of pull the data that you need to out of your TracerPlus sessions. The first thing in the basics with writing SQL within TracerPlus. The first thing that's really important is to note that all TracerPlus sessions are built on a single database table. So every time you fill out your form within TracerPlus and save that data, it's getting saved to a single table within the TracerPlus database. So each session, and there can be up to 32 on your device, will contain a database table on the back end where all of that data is going. So that's where we're going to be inserting and updating and selecting the data from when we're writing these custom SQL queries that we're going to be performing within TracerPlus. Also to note that the table name formats are all session and then the session number. So if you wanted to select data from the first session on your handheld, that table is session 1. Or in this example here, if you want to select data from the third session on your device, regardless of the session name, that table is named session 3. So it's just the session with a capital S and then the number of the session that you'd like to select that data from. If you had up to 32 sessions and you wanted to grab from the 32nd sessions table, it would be session 32, and that's how you pull the data from that session or insert or update the data to that session. Same thing with the fields. The fields formats are all field and then the field number. So if it was the 7th field, you would go ahead and name it field 7 in your SQL query to select data from the 7th field within that session. And the last thing to note here is that custom SQL is only available on the local database. So these custom SQL queries that you're writing in inserts are going to the local database on the handheld, whether it be an Android or a Windows mobile device, and posting that and selecting that information locally. You would then need to configure a TracerPlus Connect synchronization to get that data that you've now modified and manipulated on the mobile device over to your, say, backend SQL Server table or backend Oracle database or something like that. It doesn't run the scripts wirelessly over to your backend database. Okay? And there are two ways of configuring custom SQL. The first way is setting up a variable field. So any one of your fields on within your TracerPlus session, you can change the field type to be a variable field type. And then on the variable type options tab that shows up, you would change its variable type to be a custom SQL variable type. And then you can write your custom SQL within the text box that appears. So I'll be going through and showing you how that's done in just a minute here. But that's the first way of writing the custom SQL within TracerPlus. The second is to use the new, for version 9.0, form logic window. The form logic window allows you to define different actions and events that happen on your mobile form, and then you can fire the custom SQL at any point there. So you can do it during a button click. You could do it maybe when you scan a value into a field. You can fire the SQL at that point. But it really allows you to customize exactly when you'd like to run that SQL query or do some type of insert or update to the database table. You can also perform many different advanced functions within SQL, and I'll show you a sample of this in just a minute as well. You can do things like summing or averaging your data within your TracerPlus session. So say, for instance, you wanted to select all of your items from your table and sum up all of the quantities into a total running quantity on the handheld. You can do that with a sum function within SQL. So you can kind of customize and run these advanced functions in your SQL queries that you have set up to build more power into your TracerPlus sessions. All of the functions that are supported are based on the database engine, and I'll just jump on that briefly for a second. On Windows Mobile and CE, the TracerPlus database is built on top of a SQL CE 3.5 database. So any function or the syntax you're looking for, if you're doing a Windows Mobile or CE-based device, would match up with what's available within SQL CE 3.5. So any function that's available there, you can use within TracerPlus and kind of build that into your session settings. On Android, it's a SQLite database. So any function that's available within SQLite database, as long as you have your session and field names available or set up correctly, in your TracerPlus Desktop configuration, you can select that data from an Android device based on that platform type, the SQLite database. And so then again, all valid syntax and functions supported by the database are supported in TracerPlus. So anything you could write in for SQLite, SQL query or insert or update or something like that, you can then write within TracerPlus and grab that data out of your TracerPlus application. Okay. So with that, I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint and actually go ahead and kind of configure something for you within TracerPlus Desktop. Let me jump out of the application here. Okay, so here's the home screen of TracerPlus Desktop. This is where we're going to go ahead and start designing our sessions and then add the custom SQL to those sessions and deploy it to a device. Today I have a Windows-based mobile device connected to my PC, so I'm going to go ahead and configure this, deploy it to the handheld, and you can kind of see the results of the queries that we run as well as the inserts and updates. You can see that on the device here as having been deployed to a Windows mobile-based device. One thing I would like to mention, and we can send this out along with the at the end of the webinar, some of these projects that we have available in our Solution Center do have SQL functions built into the application. So for instance, if you go into the inventory section, there's a simple inventory count with custom SQL application. So if you want to take a look even further with a pre-developed application, go to our Solution Center, download and install that, and you can take a look at the settings there as well, and you can kind of take a look at how that's done on a project on your side. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start something from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and name my project here Custom SQL. In the Session 1 application here, I will just call it SQL Demo. I'm just going to go ahead and set up some applications here so that you can see how these custom SQL queries will be run through a variable field type. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a select trigger field. Okay, and I'm going to do a SQL result field here for the select. Now what I want to do in this case is remove the rest of the fields from our session. This SQL result, this is where I want to place the result of a SQL query for a select onto my form. So this SQL result will contain the result of some SQL query run against the TracerPlus database. So to do that, I'll select that field. I'm going to change its field type to be variable. When you do that, you'll see the Variable Options tab appears, and I'm going to go ahead and change the variable type to SQL. When you do that, you can go ahead and start customizing or writing the SQL that you'd like to run for this field, and the result of that SQL query will be placed in the currently selected field here, the SQL result. So what I'm going to do here is actually just write a very simple select query that'll select field 2's data and place it into field 2, the SQL result field, based on the value that I enter into this select trigger field. So let me go ahead and start doing that. So I'm going to write a select field 2. So you can see I went by the field name there, not the field name you see in TracerPlus Desktop here. So I'm going to say select field 2 from session 1, where field 1 equals. And now here what I want to do is I want to say where this field 1, whatever's entered into field 1 here, equals what the user has on the form. So you can add a static value here. So if you wanted to do select where it equals part 1, you can do that as well. Now this would select a value from your database. It would select field 2 where field 1 equals part 1. But I want to use the value that the user enters into this field 1 on my session here. So what I'm going to do here is add a field token. Field tokens will take the value from that field and place it into the SQL query before it's run. And the format for those tokens are square brackets, an open square bracket with an asterisk, then the field index, and then an asterisk and a closed square bracket. So it's basically saying this value here, replace it with whatever the user enters on the form into this select trigger field. Okay, so once a user types something in here, it's going to go ahead, place it into the SQL query here and run it against the database and do this select statement for select field 2 from session 1. One other thing to note on this form is this trigger field. This is the field on the form that will trigger the SQL to be run. So that's why I called this one SQL trigger here. Basically, it means once a user keys in a value into the select trigger and hits enter, it's going to go ahead and fire the SQL statement here. So in this case, I'm going to leave it as the select trigger. Okay, so let me just quickly jump over to the form designer and build a form for this session. So you can see I have my two fields for select trigger and then the SQL result. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and deploy this to my handheld. So I'm going to go up to the Tools, Build, Deploy. It's going to go through the deployment process. When it's completed, it'll open TracerPlus on the handheld. You can see my SQL demo form is available on the handheld. Now, the first thing I want to do is actually I'm going to clear my TracerPlus database here. So let me just delete all these. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my form. I'm going to enter one value in here. So let's just say it's 100, and this is part 100. Okay, so I'm just adding a record to my database, which then I'm going to cause the SQL to actually trigger and do this lookup for me. So I'm going to submit that. You'll see I have one record in the database, and at this point, if I type in 100 and hit enter, that triggered the SQL query to be run against the database. So you can see now it looked up that part 100 and displayed it to the user. So it was a very simple way of configuring almost a lookup, which is another feature within TracerPlus, to run that query against the TracerPlus database. If I were to add a second part to this, let's say 200, okay, I'm going to go ahead and submit that. Now if I run that SQL query again by keying in that same part number and hitting enter, it'll look up the description of that to part 200. So you can see what it's doing there. It's grabbing the 200 that I typed into the field. It's taking that and formatting the SQL statement here with that 200 and then doing the select clause here. So select field 2 from session 1 where field 1 equals 200. And it's running that against the database and placing the result into the SQL result field and displaying it to the user. Okay, so that's a very simple select clause. The next one I'm going to do is I'm going to take this a step further, and now I'm going to write an update so that we're updating data within our session database from the values on our form here. So I'm going to go ahead and add two new fields. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and do an update trigger. And then this one will be the update statement. Okay, so this one I'm just going to key in a part number again, and then when I hit enter into that field, it's going to run the update clause, and I'm going to write into this this field 4 here, which I'm going to change to a variable type. Okay, so same thing with the select. I'm going to go ahead and change this one to be a variable. I'm going to go to the variable options form and change the type to be SQL. I want to change the trigger in this case to be the update trigger. And now in this case, let's say we wanted to update the description with a new description. Maybe that let's add actually a new field. Let's insert a field here. Let's say it's a new description field. Okay, so I'm going to key in a new description field, and I basically want to update my new part 200 with something else. So I'm going to go ahead to this update statement variable. I'm going to set the trigger field to be the update trigger. Actually, you know what? I'll change it to be the new description. Probably would make more sense. Okay, I'm going to write an update clause. Now I'm going to say update session 1, set field 2. I want to change that description field, set field 2 equal to, and I'm going to do another field token here because the user is going to key this value in. Now this is session index 0123, so this is going to be a field token of 3. And then I have to do my where clause where field 1 in my database equals, and I'm going to do another field token in this case, where field 1 equals 2. Okay, so let me break this down for you guys. I'm writing an update here that's going to update my current sessions table. I'm going to set field 2, which is that description field here, which now is displaying part 200 when I scan a part number. I'm going to set that field 2 equal to the new value that the user enters into this new description field. And then I'm going to do that where field 1 of this current table equals the value that I enter into this update trigger 2 here, which I could probably also set as the first index. But I'm going to trigger that on the new description. Okay. I'm going to go back over to my form and reset the form with those new fields. Okay, so I think update session 1, set field 2 equal to 3, where field 1 equals 2. So let me go ahead and deploy this. That'll go through the deployment process, closing TracerPlus down, reopening it upon the completion of that deployment. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and run my select trigger here again. Let's look up part 200 again. So that runs my select clause against the TracerPlus database and displays the description. For the update now, I need to make sure that I put in a new description. Let's call this new part 200. Okay, new part 200. I need to make sure that I have the part number in this field as well. I put one too many fields in here, but I need to make sure I have the field number in here as well. And now if I hit enter into the new description field here, that runs, because it's the trigger field of my update, it runs this update with the value supplied, the 200, and then the new part 200, which is the new description. And this one value here, this is the number of rows affected. So if this actually comes back as 0 or blank, you'll know that your update clause failed and it didn't update any records. Because it came back as 1 here, I know that it went and updated the database with that new information. So now if I go back to my first field and hit the enter key, it's going to trigger that select query again. And now you can see it grabbed that data from the TracerPlus database and is displaying the new part. So you can see how with those two features there, I was able to rewrite almost a lookup feature within TracerPlus to a SQL select. I also was able to update my TracerPlus data without even hitting the submit button within TracerPlus. So I was able to run those two custom SQL commands there against my TracerPlus session database just by using these SQL database functions within the variable field types of TracerPlus. Just to kind of show you a little bit further, if I jump back over to the data view, you can see that data has been submitted to this session's database table. So you can see the part 100 and the part 200. This one has the new description. If I were to go back to my form, I can key in part 100. Let's put in 100 is the one that I want to update. I'm going to do new part 100. Hit enter. That will now update part 100 to the database. And if I jump back to the grid, the main grid here, you can see that new description as well. So you can see those are two simple select and update clauses, but we were able to modify the TracerPlus data within our sessions without using the standard TracerPlus submits or standard TracerPlus lookups. And one thing to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, kind of describe to you some of the power in using that. There's a lot of TracerPlus sessions that you may come across that require the data from your form back here to be submitted in different ways rather than just filling out this form and hitting submit. So rather than just filling out an inspection form and hitting submit, you can tie those SQL variables into that submit action on your form to update all of the data that you need and are required to on the form across your TracerPlus databases. So we've seen a lot of people use this to submit multiple records to their session tables. So maybe they want to submit a record of a previous state of the item. So maybe you're doing an inspection and you want to submit the data before and after the inspection. You could do that in a single action within TracerPlus, but sending that data to two different locations. Now, what I did here basically kind of replaced the functions of a lookup and almost a submit within the TracerPlus session. But in order to build in those kind of features or use cases where you need to submit more than just filling out this form and sending that to the table, you would want to use these SQL functions to do that. So you could go ahead and build in much more flexibility in how your data is being sent to the TracerPlus database. Now the next thing I wanted to show you guys today is actually go into using the form logic and how you can execute SQL using the form logic instead of these SQL variables. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and start a new project here. Let me go ahead and save my settings, I guess. Now I'm going to start a new project, and let's do, this one is maybe Logic SQL. Do just Logic demo, this case, or Logic SQL. So now I'm going to go actually, instead of using the SQL variables, I'm going to trigger this, these SQL clauses on the form logic, so I can drive that SQL anytime that I need to. Basically on button clicks, on after scans, on lookups being refreshed, anything like that that you have access to within the form logic, you can fire these SQL statements. So what I want to do in this case is I'm going to set up a new scenario where I want to have a part number field, a quantity field, and then a total quantity field. So what I want to do in this case is run a function against our database to sum up all of the quantities across all of the same part numbers. So if I were to key in a bunch of values for the part number field here and a bunch of quantities, so let's say I'm just going through a shelf and I'm counting, maybe I could do it in ones, just go 1, 1, 1, 1 every time I scan an item, or I could have the users collecting different amounts. I want to display the total that's been scanned in this total quantity field when I trigger it from the form logic. So what I'll do here is remove the fields that I'm not using. I'm going to default my quantity field to 1, and I'll leave everything else just the same here, I guess. So I just have part number, quantity, and total quantity. Let me jump over to the form designer. I'm going to create a default form, and I want to add a button here that I'm going to use the button to trigger this SQL. Okay, so I'll name the button, let's say get total quantity. Put that right here. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the form logic settings. Basically what I want to do is when the user is going through, and after I have a bunch of part numbers and quantities submitted to the table, actually let me jump over for just one quick sec. I want to delete the data on my handheld so that the data makes sense once I run this query. So I'm going to go ahead and do a delete all. Okay, so what I'm going to do is the user now can hit this get total quantity field here, and it's going to look in the database for any items that match the currently entered part number, so, and then sum all of the quantities that have been submitted for that part number. So I'm going to add a single logic item to our form logic settings here. The event is going to be an on-click event. The on-click event I want to trigger when the get total quantity button is clicked, so that's control 13. I'll go ahead and say 13. This means when control 13 is clicked, I want to do in my action, I want to do an execute SQL. Let me make this bigger here so you can see it. Okay, so now in this case, I'm going to do a sum to get the sum of every quantity value that was submitted to my database where it matches the currently selected part number. So what I'm going to do is do select sum of field 2 from session 1 where field 1 equals, and I need another field token here. The field tokens are done in just the same way, where, and it's going to be the first field. Okay, so you can see here, this is saying select the sum, or sum up the values in field 2 from this current session, from session 1, there's some space there, right? From session 1 where field 1 equals 0, the field token 0, meaning the currently entered value there. Now, one thing I need to note here is that this one actually won't work the way it is. The fields within the TracerPlus table are all varchar fields. They're all string type fields. They're not numeric fields because you can be switching those data types within your TracerPlus session settings in your field settings here. So you can change the data type to be general, number, and date time. But they're actually stored in the table themselves as varchars and then converted at the time of display and when they're being used within the TracerPlus application. So what we need to do is, in order to do a sum, this has to be a numeric field. So within this SQL clause here, I'm going to convert this field to an integer field. So I'm just going to add a convert clause, or convert function, to say convert field 2 to an int, and then do the sum. Okay? So I have select the sum of field 2, but just make sure that field 2 is a number, from session 1, where field 1 equals the currently set value in field 1 on our form. Okay? So I think I have everything set here. Actually, the last thing I need to define is where this value is going. That's what this action control ID here is. And in this case, I want to place the result in control 9. So I'm going to go ahead and put 9 here. Okay. So we have on click of 13. So when a user clicks this 13, execute SQL, this select clause for the sum, and place the result in field 9. So hopefully I have everything configured correctly here. So I'm going to go ahead and save my project and deploy this to the handheld. Okay, you can see I have my new form here, the logic SQL form. Now the first thing I need to do is actually submit a couple of records, because I have 0 records in my database. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll do the same thing like before. I'm going to do part number 100. Let me key in a couple part number 100s here. So this could simulate every time you scan an item. It's just submitting it with a quantity of 1. Okay, so you can see I did a couple of records there. Now what I want to do is actually key in the part number and hit the get total quantity. You can see there it got the total quantity, which is 5, because I submitted 5 records of part number 100, each with a quantity of 100. If I wanted to actually allow the user to key this in manually, let's say I wanted to go ahead and key in a 15 and submit this. Now if I key that value in again and I hit this get total quantity, it should be 20, because it should have 5 items with a single quantity and 1 with that 15. So when I hit the get total quantity there, you can see it summed up all of the values within that database table and displayed it to the user here on the form. If I were to actually go back to that database table so you can see it, you can see here part number 100 has been submitted a total of 6 times, each with a quantity here initially of 1 and then with one of 15. So by running that SQL query there, I was able to, where field 1 equals this part number 100, I was able to calculate the sum of field 2 and display that to the user. And you can do that with any other SQL functions. You can do averaging, summing, min-max values. You can do a last function where you can get maybe the last submitted record if you wanted to do that and display it to the user. But by building on these SQL functions that you can add to your TracerPlus sessions, you can build in a lot more flexibility in how you're displaying, updating, and just using the data on the handheld within your TracerPlus session. Okay, so I think that's everything that I wanted to show you today. Basically the 2 points of where you can set your logic, both in the variable field, or not logic, I'm sorry, your custom SQL, both in the variable field type settings for a field, as well as the form logic form within the form designer in TracerPlus Desktop. So those are the 2 areas where you can configure that custom SQL, and you can kind of run any SQL script that you can think of to get that data out of your TracerPlus tables and display it to the user in some pretty interesting ways. So here's our contact information. If anyone has any questions as they go through setting anything up today, or if they have any feedback on today's webinar, we'd appreciate any feedback on that as well. Please send those over to the contact information here, because we'd like to get your feedback on the content of these webinars. You know, how you think we did in these webinars. Did you get you know, what we want you to get out of them? So please feel free to reach out to us. And as always, if you're setting up the application, have any questions or feedback on that as well, just reach out to us. We'd be glad to hear what you guys are setting up. So with that, I appreciate everybody joining us today and look forward to seeing you again in the future. All right, thanks, everyone.